If you struggle with squat depth and your hips are tight, I've got the 5 best exercises to help improve your squat depth by unlocking your hip mobility. So let's jump right into it by talking about my favorite stretch for improving squat depth, and that's the posterior hip stretch. This is gonna look similar to the pigeon stretch that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but I'm telling you, the small details here will make this drastically more effective than the pigeon stretch. And so really pay attention to how I get lined up here. I'm gonna start on my hands and knees directly below my hips. I'm gonna kick the non-working leg back just so it's out of the way. From there, I'm gonna spin my foot in, keeping my knee directly below my hip. So I externally rotate that leg until I feel just a mild amount of tension in the glutes. The key here is the next 2 steps, because this kind of looks like the pigeon stretch here if I was to drop down. The way you make this more effective is number 1, you shift your hips to the side. So as I shift to the side and get my hip joint outside of my knee, I'll feel some tension on the outside of my hip. Then I'm gonna keep my chest really tall as I sit back. And what you'll find is you don't have to sit back very far before you get a really big and deep stretch in the back side of the hip. Versus the pigeon stretch where you don't have that side shift and you let your back round, you'll be able to go super far down into that stretch and it just won't be anywhere near as effective as this posterior hip shift. So really pay attention to those details and you will get so much more out of that mobilization. Up next, we're going to work on our hip internal rotation. So frequently we focus on hip external rotation with stretches like the pigeon stretch. But if your internal rotation is limited and you get it unlocked, I promise you will see massively fast improvements in your squat depth. Here's my favorite exercise for that. I've got a resistance band tied to the upright of my rig, and I'm gonna step on that. Then I'm gonna get down on the ground in this 90-90 position here. So my thigh here is parallel with my pelvis, and I've got my chest really upright. I'm gonna slowly lift that back leg up. And that band is helping me to pull up into internal rotation. But I'm doing it slow and controlled, and then I'm gonna push down into it. I'm thinking like 3 seconds to slowly let that lower up, push down. Now, if you haven't done this before, be prepared for your hip to cramp pretty significantly. It's a rather gnarly stretch, and it trains your hip muscles in a position they don't often go into. Go from a heavier band that gives you more assistance to a lighter band as your mobility progresses there. But man, is that one really good for unlocking your squat depth. Our next 2 stretches really work on improving how wide we can get with our squat stance. Now, every athlete doesn't need to do that, but I find that very frequently a bit wider of a squat stance helps some athletes hit depth a little bit more easily. And so the first one we're gonna do, we're gonna be adductor rock back. So we start down on our hands and knees and we're gonna kick one leg out to the side, keep a really tall chest, and we just sit back. And as you sit back here, you're gonna feel a good stretch on the inside of the thigh. Hang in there for a second or 2 and then rock back forward. But just that rock back and forth is gonna get your adductors a little bit more mobile, which can help you increase your squat stance width. The next exercise for doing the same that also does a phenomenal job of just generally mobilizing the hip joints is going to be 90-90 rotation. So we're getting back into that same position we were in with the band, where this thigh is parallel to our pelvis, other thigh is perpendicular to our pelvis. We're trying to keep our chest really upright. I'm using my hands on the floor to keep really tall. My goal on this is to keep my knees as far apart from each other as I can. So I'm gonna lift my back leg up until it can no longer lift any higher. And then I'm gonna start to rotate my entire body that direction while my hands keep me pushed forward, trying to keep my torso as tall as possible. As I slowly rotate again, keeping those knees as far separated from each other as I can, all the way over to one side, drop that knee to the ground, and then reverse directions here. A really good stretch. Make sure you go slow and controlled. This is not about speed. This is about time under tension on the hip joint itself. Our final stretch is going to be Russian Babymakers. When you see me do it, you're gonna understand why it's called this. I didn't make it up, so don't judge me. Don't leave nasty comments in this YouTube video here, but it is a great general stretch for the hips, and I really like it because it helps us drive those knees out into the position that the hips are better suited to squat to depth from. So I'm gonna get into my squat stance here, and I'm just gonna bend over. Right here, I feel a decent stretch in my hamstrings, but I'm gonna hold my toes down on the ground, and then I'm gonna drop down into a squat. And as I drop down, I'm trying to push my knees as far out and away from my arms as I possibly can. Some people won't be able to keep much space there, but just that emphasis on that outward knee drive will open your hips up, drop your butts down as low as it can possibly go, then take your hips back up towards the sky, feel a little hamstring stretch, and then drop back down. So in general, my game plan here from a mobility perspective is to target the 1 or 2 areas that are most limited in somebody's hip mobility. Again, check out the Ultimate Mobility Checklist to figure out what that is for you. And then I follow it up with something like the Russian Babymakers there, just to really dial in that bottom position a little bit more. If you want a proven program that's been used by thousands of athletes to help improve their hip mobility for better squats, then head to performanceplusprogramming.com and check out our hip mobility overhaul program as well. It is a phenomenal plan that is designed to improve your squat depth by unlocking your hip mobility.